So can people in Facebook land see us now? There we go. All right.
I think it's
We-
just setting us up, but I think we're live.
We made it. We made it.
We made it. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We're running a little behind, but we are here nonetheless. So I am here today with Dr. Julie Helmrich, and she is a hero of mine. I am so grateful that she is here today. I have a deep and profound respect for her as a clinician. She has, as a coach and a psychologist, and she's been working in the field for over 40 years, and she is phenomenal, just phenomenal.
Oh,
and so
that's nice.
So Julie, is there any introduction that you can give about yourself? Anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I would like to say to you, thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really honored to be asked. And I said on my Facebook page, I generally don't do this, but I'm not that out there or whatever in terms of being interviewed. I'm fine being interviewed, but what I really like about the work you're doing and how it fits into the stuff that I've been doing, like, as you said, I started doing work in clinical work in 1980. So whatever that it is 40 years, isn't it?
It is.
Wow. And I think you and I have sort of a weird connection. We are both clinicians, we're both coaches, we're both people who think in terms of, the way language and dialogue really give people an opportunity to change their lives. And where do we meet? We don't meet at some psychotherapy conference. We meet at a business conference.
Yep.
And when you told me your story and what you were trying to do with trauma, I mean, that's really, it's cool what you're trying to do, Jenna. So I'm happy. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here to, help any of the people. I hope our conversation gets out there to people. I'm really excited for the content that we're going to cover. And
coming from you especially, that means a great deal to me, because you really are one of my heroes, and I just thank you so much. So sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, but I think there's what you're doing is why I'm here. So that admiration goes both directions.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you don't really do a lot of interviews like this. It's not a normal thing for you, but you talked to me today, which I am ever so grateful for. But why did you choose to do this interview and not most?
Well, it isn't. I mean, I wouldn't say the phone is ringing off the hook with people trying to interview me.
Whatever, I bet.
Yeah, no, but I'm more. I don't seek out like speaking engagements. If I'm asked, I'll speak. But when you said you were doing this, and you said, "What about having a conversation?" I part of it is your story is really interesting to me. So there we are at the business conference, and we find out we have this shared, like we're both interested in business, but we're also really interested in what can you do online, how can you reach people online, and also, the advantages of doing some things online. I mean, for instance, you're in Salt Lake City, I'm here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We get to talk, even though we're, I don't know, what is that? What are we, 15 hours apart or something if we were to drive?
Pretty long ways,
yeah. And I mean, I think you'll be talking about this. It seems like you freely talk about it, but you're younger than I am. And when you said, well, part of my interest in trauma is that I'm a cancer survivor. I mean, my head sort of whipped like, what? I expect cancer survivor to be somebody in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and here I was speaking with somebody, and I don't, the people on my Facebook page who I'm sharing this with, they don't know any of that story. So, I mean, would you be interested in just
absolutely
telling people what you told me, and then it's a lot easier for me to say, look, if you met somebody and they gave you this story and you found out what they were going to do around trauma, and you had some trauma expertise, yes, I would help.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, so my story is what
Hmm.
happened to me was I was attending a university on the North Shore of Hawaii. So I had an idyllic life. I was very happy. I was confident. I was secure, which actually, I finally got to that place in my life where I had really great interpersonal connections. I was feeling really great spiritually. Just life was really I was happy. I mean, it was looking
Yeah.
good. I felt secure and safe in the world. And I developed a cough. And so I kept going to the university doc, the doctor there on campus, and I got misdiagnosed several times. He said it was, at one point, and I don't know how this came up, but an ear infection, swollen cartilage in my lungs, bronchitis, several diagnoses. And then finally, my parents insisted that I go, because I was 19 at the time. I was just a
Yeah.
university student. And they insisted that I go and get a CT scan done in Honolulu. So I drove I remember this day perfectly. It was a Friday afternoon, and we were preparing for a big beach bonfire that evening. And so I was driving to this doctor's appointment to have my first CT scan ever. I didn't really even understand what that was. And, laughing, talking. I went with a friend of mine. So we were just having fun, eating chips, drinking soda. We were just normal teenagers. And so I really walked into that appointment and came out an entirely different person. They misdiagnosed me again in that appointment, but they were able to see that there was a tumor underneath my breastbone, the size of a softball. So
Yeah.
they thought that we could remove it surgically. So then I mean, my whole world shifted. I all of a sudden became very vulnerable. I felt worried. No longer did I feel safe and secure in the world around me. So my I talked they said that we could do the surgery there, but I refused. I was only 19 and I wanted to go home back to Salt Lake with my family and have them be a part of it with my parents and that support system. So my parents kind of arranged in the next few days for me to come back home, and I was walking around in a blur. I mean, just even to get a diagnosis like a tumor that they thought at the time was benign, the size of a
That's the stuff.
softball.
Yeah. It's this
Yeah.
big. Yeah.
Yeah, in
Mm.
between your heart and lungs, no less. So it's like pushing up on both. That's why I had the cough.
Mm.
And so I flew home. And then once I got to Salt Lake, they looked at the CT scan, did a couple of blood tests, and they were able to say that with a surety that it was cancer, malignant, that I was going to have to do chemotherapy and radiation, that I would not be going back to Hawaii in 3 weeks as I thought when I was leaving. It just
Hmm.
shifted everything. So
Hmm.
I had
Hmm.
this big shift where I went from a child to an adult in a matter of moments, days, and
Hmm.
also just, it was a big shift in every way.
Yeah.
My,
And
my
and go ahead.
well, I was just going to say my whole self in the world changed. My world views, everything about my life shifted overnight.
Yeah. And that's part of how we got connected, because we have a mutual interest in narrative and the power of story and the power of narrative to heal. and
Yeah.
and I mean, here you are, obviously you survived the cancer.
Hmm.
And
Well, and that was another part. So going through the entire treatments, and actually it was at a point it was supposed to end, and I went in and the cancer wasn't gone, so I had to continue and do more treatments than we had previously planned, which that was heartbreaking to me at the time. I was just so exhausted. I
yeah.
just felt like going and falling asleep and not waking up. It wasn't at all suicidal per se. It
Yeah.
sounds that way, but it was actually, I was just exhausted.
Yeah.
And then after I finished all of my treatments and my body was able to start physically healing again, that's when a lot of the emotional turmoil and a lot of my spiritual, psychological, emotional problems actually began. That was the beginning of a whole new journey. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's part of what, when we first started talking a couple of years ago. um because I met you, you didn't look like your company is Thrive by Design, which I
Hmm.
think is a fantastic name, because certainly when we met, you look like here's a young to me, here's a young person who's thriving.
Yeah.
And then when I hear this story, I'm like, whoa, how did you do that? And then when you said, and I'm doing what I want to do is I really want to, teach people what I learned. But you didn't, this isn't just your story. I mean, you went off, you got a master's degree, you've been doing counseling for quite a while.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, I've been doing it 40 years, but it's not like you started yesterday either.
Yeah. No,
Um,
I'm in over a decade now. It's been about 11
yeah,
years, 11, 12 years.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
not the same as you, but it's up
Getting
there.
there, you're getting there. Yeah.
One day. So
Well, and when we talked about doing this conversation, we said we thought we could just present content, but we could also talk about it. And
yeah.
one of the things we talked about was this idea that which we both know about, but I mean, you were probably in the cancer center and looking around, and there were probably people there who didn't look like they were on the I'm going to survive and I'm a victim of cancer, I'm going to survive cancer and then I'm going to move into thriving.
Yeah.
You
Absolutely.
clearly did do that
Yeah.
journey and you clearly are thriving now and
Thank
you're
you.
married and you have a child and James is
Yeah.
so
Well, and
cool and
yeah, and that's true. Looking around there, sometimes the prognosis doesn't look the same for every single cancer patient that's sitting
yeah.
in the chairs getting treated. It can look a lot different actually. And at first I wasn't sure because I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is actually a
Hmm.
very, it's a serious one. It's a blood cancer like leukemia.
Hmm.
I was in
Hmm.
stage 2, which that's a treatable one. So that gave us hope. But
Hmm.
it's always scary and to face your mortality, if you will, at such a young age or any
Yeah,
time. That's
exactly.
it's huge. And then after, like I mentioned, after so you mentioned that now I'm thriving. And actually that was a process that I had to learn after I finished my cancer treatment and I was physically healed or healing. It took years to actually fully heal.
Hmm.
Um, Probably still currently, you know, there's
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
things that shifted because of the chemotherapy and the radiation.
Yeah.
It was after I finished that post-traumatic stress disorder is a big diagnosis. Everybody hears about it. I knew that I had a lot of those symptoms. It's when I
Hmm.
decided that I wanted to go to graduate school and become a clinician, become a therapist, help people. And then on top of that, I actually, after I went and got my master's degree and I got the training to help people through these things using a lot of therapeutic modalities, I then went off for a year and a half just to do service and focus on other people. And actually, that was my first step to what we call post traumatic growth, which was
Right.
when I
Right.
was focusing 100% of my time and efforts on helping other people, on caring and loving them more than concerning myself about me. Because I
Hmm.
had been in a bad place. I was, with post traumatic stress disorder, sometimes, I had felt like I was a victim. I felt like I was entitled. I felt like there were things I
Yeah.
could, I was um, like making excuses for myself to kind of be, not like a terrible person, but to lie maybe in relationships or to be deceitful. I couldn't make a decision. I could not make decisions for
Yeah.
that time period, which that's
Yeah.
normal. We see from after a big
Yeah.
and I
Yep.
also had a very hard time emotionally when any change was placed in front of me. So
Hmm.
I went and got my schooling, my university trained, my master's degree. And
Hmm.
then I
Hmm.
went and did this service. And I feel like that service, that caring
Hmm.
about other people more than myself for that time period, that was my first real step into the post-traumatic growth for myself. And this was years
Hmm.
ago at this point. And so
Hmm.
it was monumental for me.
Yeah, and we were talking about it. We One of the things that we said was that both in our own life experiences personally and with, people close to us who we know and love and care about and people we've worked with professionally, we're both still surprised that like the idea of post-traumatic growth for us is not new, but it's still most people are still surprised
Yeah.
You know, that the belief, I think, the really common belief, and it's a misconception, is that if somebody has a traumatic event happen to them, cancer, loss of a job, loss of a parent, loss of a child, loss of a limb, loss
Yeah.
of, you know, um,
Divorce, abuse, domestic
divorce,
violence.
abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A partner
That
being like
yeah,
infidelity. Yeah.
yeah. So there's all of these events, that can shatter a person's world
Yes.
and do. And because PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, has gotten so much airtime. We were talking when that first times we were talking, like, isn't it unfortunate that people don't know about post traumatic growth, because it is in fact the normal, the
Hmm.
typical thing that a human being does in response to traumatic events. And we always say, like, not talking to each other, but talking to other people, believe it or not, is post traumatic growth. And the only thing that the only way clinicians are probably different from other people is that we just know more about the particular process. So, you know, you can look at what human beings have done over a lifetime, over centuries, really. And, post traumatic stress disorder in some way or another has been in the picture. In the World War I, I think they called it being shell shocked.
Shell shock. Yep.
And in Korea, I don't remember what they called it.
Yeah.
In World War II, what did they start calling it? Whatever. There were all these labels, but then
Yeah.
then basically they took it out of the arena of combat, and they said it's really trauma.
Hmm.
And combat can be traumatizing,
Yes.
but it's not traumatizing to everybody. And part of it isn't that people aren't really affected by combat. It's the meaning of the losses, the meaning of the events, it's the meaning of the cancer, it's the meaning of the loss of the marriage, or the loss of the job, or the loss of a limb, or whatever it is, whatever the thing is that shattered the person's world. It's the meaning that they put to it. And
Absolutely.
we don't, this is tricky, right? You don't want to say make some lemonade out of the lemons, because that's really demeaning to
Right.
people.
Yeah, because it was a terrible,
Yeah,
terrible time. And you have to validate that. You have to go to those dark places in order to be able to come through
yeah.
that with your narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the things we talked about, talking about tonight, is that there's um, as we both know, but maybe a lot of people out there don't know, there's a really predictable 5-step process, right, that
Hmm.
people go through once their world has been shattered by some event. And the first one, as you know, is that their belief system is shattered. So there's
Yes.
the event, and we're lots of times we think, well, that event is going to shatter anybody. But actually, the event doesn't shatter people. What actually shatters is their belief system. And that's an important thing. We were talking about that earlier, right? The most important thing about that is for people to understand, like, there's a difference between your belief system being shattered and you being broken permanently.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's an important thing. And you were, I don't want to, I mean, I know that you have a lot to say on that, so I'm just gonna, like, your belief, as you said, you walk it in to, I'm gonna get a CT. What in the world is that? I don't know. I've just got soda and chips here, and I'm gonna go to a bonfire tonight.
Right.
But
That's a perfect example. Yeah.
and then
I
and
walked
then
in thinking about that bonfire, what I was going to be doing later on as a college student on North
yeah,
Shore in Hawaii. And I came out and my belief system was entirely shattered, which
yeah,
meant that I no longer felt safe and secure in the world. I no longer
yeah,
trusted my body. I felt
yeah,
completely betrayed. I mean, yeah. And
yeah,
so many people have experiences, whether they're big or small, where
right,
they feel this way. And
yeah,
as we also have spoken about in the past, you cannot get over these things. You cannot push through them until you process through them. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is genius about the work that you're doing, is like being able to
Thank you.
make that really accessible, to people. Like processing, the question is, do you have to do that in a room with somebody? And the old school is absolutely you have to. We both like that. We both like sitting in a room with somebody or somebodies and like walking them through the whole process. But the nice thing about online stuff is there's a lot of privacy
Yeah.
that
And
you can get,
convenience.
and convenience, yeah,
Yeah.
about so anyway, I just love what you're doing.
Thank
But I
you.
think so if you think about that, the story of you walking in to get your CT scan
Mhm.
to me is like a perfect thing, because part of what happens after that shattering, like in a way, people don't think about this too much, but nothing actually changed in your life. I mean,
Right.
it did, but the what actually changed was you understood something differently. You know,
Right.
you had cancer 3 months before, 2 months before, a month before, whatever. In a way, nothing actually changed. You just became aware of it.
Exactly. Yep.
And the awareness, the knowledge, the meaning that you put was some version of like, my life's over,
Mhm. That's what
and
changed everything.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And people with cancer diagnoses will tell you that's exactly like they have the, pre-cancer diagnosis and then post-cancer diagnosis. They know
Exactly.
that date. They know that date.
Yeah.
Like, do you know the date of your diagnosis?
I don't I know that I started chemotherapy on February 2nd.
See,
But the diagnosis date and all of that is a big jumble, sometime
yeah,
mid-January. Yeah.
yeah. So the idea that it's a jumble is another really typical symptom, because part of what that shattering does, so that shattering of basic fundamental beliefs is the first step, right? So the
Right.
actual processing is that people need to, well, we say we do trauma education, but then the second step is, once people understand that ground they were standing on that used to feel solid just
Mhm.
shook, the world below their feet just shook. Of course they're going to be nervous. Of course they're going to be anxious. So I joke that once you appreciate what got shattered, and that you're going to be triggered by things that are like that, you have to become like, you have to get a PhD in managing anxiety. And
Exactly.
and that's a thing that, what do you think? I think people have a hard time admitting that what they have been through really changed them at a physiological level, that they get triggered, that they go from 0 to 60 in no time.
Well, I know that that was the case in my situation. For years after my cancer, I had what I called a weak complex, which means I had to appear strong at all costs, even if I was completely, you know, feeling completely broken down inside. Something, the smell of the hospital that I was treated at, to this day, if I walk in there, it's like a punch to the face,
Yeah,
so yeah,
yeah,
becoming an expert in anxiety and
yeah.
being able to have those skills to be able to go back to my appointments regularly, which at first I had to do very, very often. And then over the
Mhm,
next
mhm,
decade, 10 years, it became less and less. But these are things that I had to do. I had to go and
mhm,
deal with
mhm,
that. So being
mhm.
able to learn how to be this expert in anxiety management, it was
Yeah,
was absolutely crucial.
yeah, and that's, yeah, and it doesn't take the cancer away. It just means, and I think my theory has been, when people kind of don't want to engage, I mean, they don't want to acknowledge, like, my whole body just got hijacked. I just
Right.
got triggered. I just got, you know, my heart is racing. I don't even know. I just know that I went from 0 to 100 in a split second. That I think part of why people don't want to take a look at that, and I understand this, is that sort of means the cancer won. Like, okay, I got the
Hmm. Yeah.
diagnosis, I got the treatment, it's gone, and it didn't change me. It's behind me. It's over. You know, it's hard to face it. I think I'm very sympathetic. I think it's very hard to face. Actually, the cancer is still kind of winning here a little bit, because every time I smell the hospital, you know, I get transported back and I feel nervous and my body,
Right.
sort of takes over. So that's step 2, like really
Yeah.
super getting good at
Well, and
anxiety management is critical. Go ahead.
yeah, and one more thing about that too that I found in myself and that I've seen in many of my clients is this desire to control everything afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
You because you were betrayed so profoundly by your own
Yeah.
body at this time,
Yeah.
the desire to go in and control all of these things
Yeah.
makes it becomes huge. However, as
Yeah.
we well know in the mental health and emotional health world, we really can't control anything except for, our reactions,
Our own reactions to it. Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
to be able to kind of roll with it was something that I had a hard time doing for a very long time.
Mhm.
My clients have the
Mhm.
same time, like, so being able to feel that sense of
Yeah.
regaining control of your own body afterwards, your own reactions to things. So it can be difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought your story about that you went into service and that was a huge part of the recovery. That's not surprising when you look
Yeah,
at trauma science because
right.
that third step of a of it's we would call it engaging in constructive self-disclosure. That doesn't, if you say it that way, it sounds like, oh, I have to just sort of spill my guts or something. But I have to tell somebody everything I've been through, which is really not exactly the case.
No.
It's really more that, like, there you are on your, doing your big service journey and trip, and you're talking with a lot of people about their
Mhm.
journey, about where they're going and where they're at, and you get to weave into that where you've been at and what your journey is and where you're going, and all of a sudden that dialogue starts. It's healing for everybody who's participating in it. And
Absolutely.
so, I think a lot of people think, well, if I had this trauma and if I know I'm getting triggered, I need to get therapy. And you and I were like, well, you have to do something that's therapeutic, but do you have to walk into a therapist's office? Maybe not. Maybe if you learn something about what constructive self-disclosure is, and we were joking, like, what constructive self-disclosure isn't. It's saying something to your pal when you say, okay, this is the thing that I've gone through, and then they
Right.
say back to you like, oh, you've been through that. Wait till you hear
The
what
one
I've
up.
been through.
Right.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
one up. Yeah.
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 Not constructive, not
Nope.
constructive. Understandable, but not constructive.
Right.
So that selection of somebody or a group of people or some way,
Mhm.
um, you know, you and I talk about, can this be done through journaling? We're sort of wondering. We don't know yet, but there are some people who believe that you can, that constructive self-disclosure can be between you and you. I'm iffy on if that's the case. I'm not sure. I do think that dialogue is more efficient.
Yeah.
A conversation with somebody is better. And
Yeah.
then, um so as we were talking about this, and I'm just sort of hearing your story in my head, I'm just mapping it on to like, yep. And Jenna's whole journey there was that 5-step sequence where after that constructive self-disclosure, then you start
Creating a
thinking,
new narrative.
yeah, you start thinking differently. Like
Exactly.
you don't wish cancer on anybody. You don't want people to get broken. You just
Absolutely
start
not.
thinking differently
Right.
about what has this event, it has done something to me,
Hmm. Well, and
but
there's so
there's a
many.
possibility of it doing something for me. And that's what I
Exactly.
loved about your image and your which I think, by the way, that's James, your son, in the image, isn't it?
It is. That's my
He's a cute.
that's my James. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So
adorable.
yeah, he is adorable. He is, for
If I
sure,
don't say so
right? As
myself.
as you know, he is the cutest kid on the planet. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. You said something like something, I don't recall exactly now what you said, but something bad happened to you.
Mhm.
What did you actually use when you for the image for these conversations? The
Uh,
copy, you said something like,
let's see. Hmm.
something bad has happened, make it work for, I don't remember what it was, but
Yeah.
that's really
Bad
step
stuff
4.
happens. Allow it to empower you. Post
Yeah,
traumatic growth. Hard times can make you better. And this is true. I mean, so
yeah,
many,
yeah,
we have so many examples through history, historically, that we've seen. I mean, Viktor Frankl, he's a famous one here that was able
yeah,
to
yeah,
take a horrible situation and yet come out of it with something to learn, something to teach, something to share. Audrey Hepburn grew up
yeah,
in the Nazi area in, I believe, Holland. I can't remember right now, but
yeah,
she
yeah,
was
that's
able to
correct.
stand up against the Nazis, and she had a
Hmm.
terrible where she wanted to be a ballerina, was so malnourished that she wasn't able to do that, and yet became one of the greatest, in my opinion, actresses the silver screen has ever seen. So
Hmm.
there's so many. Maya Angelou. I mean, we could
Yeah,
go on. So
yeah, yeah,
where they were
yeah,
able to take these hardships, turn
yeah,
it into something amazing, stand for that, and go and help others. And that was what it was about.
yeah. Immaculée Ilabagaza'i. I'm not sure if I say her name right, but yeah, she was a part of the Hutus and Tutsis when that was going on in
Mm,
Rwanda, and so
wow.
she survived that, and on the other side of it came out, really wanting people to understand, and this is common, understand what faith has done, understand how she's survived. So, that's the science on that, is that step for creating a new narrative. One of the really common outcomes is that people develop a deeper sense of, I always think of it as non-duality, like a deeper sense of we're all one, a deeper
Yeah.
sense of compassion, a deeper sense of we're all together, a deeper sense of being a part of something larger than myself, which
It-
is part of why I think your service program was so profoundly,
oh,
I
absolutely.
think it accelerated your, I think that really accelerated your recovery.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I know that it was my first step, and I was able to come back from that experience and no
Yeah.
longer have that fear that was
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely, it was
Well,
huge.
and because, so I think your step 4 and your step 5 were sort of woven together, because the fifth step is creating beliefs that can't be shattered.
Yep.
And well, they can be shattered, but not as easily as the ones who were shattered.
Robust belief system. Yeah.
Yeah, a robust belief system. Yeah.
Hmm.
Which none of us think we have a wimpy belief system until it gets shattered. And
Right.
then we go, okay, that belief system was not quite as tough as I thought it was. Things in the world aren't quite what I thought they were. Things in me aren't quite what I thought they were. Things in other people aren't quite what I thought they were. So there's a lot of redoing of narrative that
Hmm.
is at the basis of people, um, taking the event that happened to them and, making the most of it. I mean, this to me, when I think about trauma, I go, well, this traumatic event happened in somebody's life. It happened to them. And it's one thing that it happened to them. It's a whole other thing when they are basically forced, and I always think of it through lack of knowledge. They don't really know. Well, there are a whole bunch of things they don't know. They might not know it's possible, like for them, not just for other people who are lucky, but it's really possible for them to move in the direction of growth. I mean, it's not
Right.
magic. It's not magic, and it takes work, but it isn't impossible.
Yeah.
And people can learn how to process that stuff. It's a little like, I just think of it, if you swallow something whole and it's just sitting in your stomach and it doesn't get digested, it doesn't get processed,
Hmm.
it just sits there, like, what does that do to you? And that's
Right.
what trauma does that's not processed, right? It's just sitting in you. And it's this idea of baggage and,
Heavy
all sorts of stuff.
weight.
Yeah, it's heavy, pulls you down. You get more of the negative emotions of, fear, anger, and contempt. You know, because
Right.
that's a thing we don't like to talk about this because it's the one of the ugly sides of trauma, which is you get a little judgmental,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know, and we share that too. Like we see
Mm.
somebody being super judgmental. First, it's irritating, but after that, you start going, I wonder what they've been through
Right.
because that's a really common, it's a really common reaction to trauma is you get cynical,
Yeah.
and that cynicism comes out and you start, you don't have that happy, carefree 19-year-old college student.
Right.
Now you have a sort of like, what kind of a world is this anyway? And
Right.
how many people misdiagnosed me along the way, and
Right.
how much did all of that lost time cost me?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
and what about other people who weren't so lucky?
Right.
Like, you
Right.
start thinking about like this is a these people don't know what they're doing, and this is a terrible place, and who came up with the idea of cancer anyway, and why would you give cancer to a kid?
Right. There's that
And
survival guilt piece as well. That's real. I mean, a couple
yeah,
of years ago, I had a friend pass away from cancer. Quick, he was diagnosed. Quick, 2 months, and he was gone. And
uh,
I felt horrible, and I really think that this leads into, and I right at that point too, I had done I had done my work. I was doing this work, and I
yeah,
still had this tinge of, oh, why this isn't fair. Like, he was amazing. Why did I survive and he didn't? And I think this lends into this identification piece where it's like, because trauma is not what is wrong with you, it's something that happened to you. But so many times this can lend to, it becomes a piece of identifying myself. Now I'm a survivor, I'm a cancer survivor, but sometimes that can be not
yeah,
as helpful with
yeah, yeah,
healing, of course, feeling like
yeah,
you're a survivor and moving that into the thriving realm, which is what, we both focus on in
yeah,
our various lines of work. But that's disempowering when you feel like this is who I am, rather than this is something that happened to you. And that's the case with trauma across the board. Any type of
yeah.
trauma that happened, it's not you. That's not you. It's what happened to you. Now you decide who you are, and let's go with that. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I think and that choice of like where do I go to from here, there's a
mhm.
lot of possibility for people.
Yeah, which is the great thing about post traumatic growth rather than post
Right,
traumatic stress disorder. We're focusing on the growth. We're
right.
empowering individuals rather than focusing on that victimization piece, feeling that stress disorder, just, it has a
Did
totally
you
different feel, those two.
Yeah, I have a question for you. There were, you got trained, you have a master's degree, you got trained in doing counseling for depression and anxiety and
Hmm.
addiction and, all of the standard things and, relationship issues and
Yep.
just stress management, all the basics.
Hmm.
Um, how did you start thinking, I ought to do something with this? I ought to try to reach people online. Like, how did you arrive at that? Not, a lot of people with some version of your exact story. I mean, they're working in clinics or they've
Right.
moved on to a different profession, but you haven't. You've stayed with it. And how did you? I'd like to hear because we've never talked about that.
Yeah.
How did you decide to go from like a really traditional approach to helping people
Yeah.
to doing what you're doing now?
That's a great question, because I've done that work. I've worked in the VA, I've worked in the school system, I've worked in community mental health, and I've worked in private practice. I've
Yeah,
had a lot of experience there. And honestly, I feel like there's so much more good I can do online, because there's things
yeah,
that I can teach.
yeah.
First of
I do
all,
too.
yeah, you're reaching a larger audience. So the potential of me finding those people who need specifically what I can give, who need my program, I can
Hmm.
find them this way. Whereas in before, it's harder. Also online, Julie, I believe you're the same way, where, we don't accept insurances, which, when you accept insurance and you work from that angle,
Yeah,
they really control I mean, it's all about paperwork. It's all about documentation. There's so many times that your hands are tied behind your back with red bureaucratic tape. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't love that. I want to be able to help my people. They're not
yeah,
just clients. Yeah, they're clients, yes, but help the people. Like they're people I love. These are my people. And I want to
yeah,
be able to help them in a way that I see that is the best from these experiences that I've had. Not let
yeah,
insurance companies tell me what little I need to do to just like check off the boxes, because that's really what it is. In so
yeah.
many
So
ways, I
much.
think the therapeutic way, like the therapeutic system right now is failing as a whole. I
I
mean,
agree.
we can't do the work that we need to do with people anymore. It's,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's
This
why
is
I came
yeah.
online.
This is and I totally support that. I mean, this is a statistic that I don't know when I first learned about this, but it blew me out of the water, which is that, I always phrase it this way: on any given day in America, 1 in 10 people could use a therapy appointment,
Mhm.
but of those 10 people, only two go,
Exactly.
and the other eight basically suffer. And there are only 20% of Americans who are really flourishing, which, if it's 10% who could really use a therapy appointment and 20% who are flourishing, that's 70% of the people out there who are languishing, and they're not going to walk in a clinic. They're
No,
not going to. They're just
no.
going to languish. They're just going to be uncomfortable, and they're just going to be triggered, but they'll get through the day, or they
Right.
will get through the month or the year. But
And the sad part is how many people are doing that. There's so many people
right,
doing that. That's
right, right.
so many
And so
people.
so when you start looking at that, you have to start thinking about, well, even if I worked with 20, 30 people a week, you still can't reach the kind of people that you can reach online if you set it up well, and I don't know if I told you this, but part of my history was that I was really early on a part of teaching things online, like 1997, if you can believe that. I mean,
That is early.
I
That's awesome.
know that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
um and I was teaching graduate courses in clinical psychology for a university that was one of the first to say we can teach this stuff online. I still was not very convinced of that it was a I didn't for sure. I knew it wasn't a better way. I got convinced that it might be comparable, but what really got me, why I signed my name on the dotted line and became a faculty member for that university, was that somebody looked at me and said, "Well, what about the person in the middle of North Dakota who gets snowed in half the time and can't get to a university to get training? How are they going to get an education? And why would you?" They really start. I opened my heart and my attitude,
Mhm.
towards doing things online, because because online stuff can reduce a lot of isolation.
Absolutely.
People can be connected online. I mean, simple things. You and I are probably 15 hours apart by car right now.
Right.
And neither of us are isolated. But what if one of us was, and they needed somebody to have this, you know, constructive self-disclosure kind of conversation with? There's
Yeah.
nobody in their town, or their
Yeah.
town isn't near, or maybe there is somebody, maybe they have been to one or two or three um, counselors, and just hasn't clicked. So then,
Mhm.
to me, I wish just about everybody was doing something online,
Yeah.
because there's no way that the people who need the education and the service, there's no way we're not reaching a tenth of them.
I agree. I agree.
And
And I
so
know
there's a
personally, I'm a part of some groups online, and I feel closer to those people than I do to many of the people right around me. I mean, I feel really close to my
Me
close
too.
friends and
Yeah,
a lot of interpersonal connections I have with family members locally and all of
same.
that. But
same.
as far as friendships or business goes, I feel closer to people from all over the world due to some really tight-knit close groups online.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think one of the things that online has helped is that you can find each other. So, you can find a particular, we call it niching down, right? A really tiny group of people, but if if the number of people in the world is 7 billion or whatever it is today, I don't know. Um, can you find 100 who are
Yeah.
really focused on the thing that you're focused on? Yes, you can. And can you find 100 of those people in your hometown? Maybe not. Maybe you wouldn't be able to find them in your hometown, but you
Sure.
could find them online. And that's part of what I love about when you told me what you're doing with trauma. I'm like, that's genius. It's great. It's needed. And yes, I would be happy to, get on a call with you and talk about trauma. You know what I'm not sure what our time frame here is. I know we couldn't get started. I can keep going. I don't want to,
Yeah, well,
I'm not
maybe
sure what
since
you
we
want to do.
got started about 10 to 15 minutes late, so maybe we can just keep going for a few more minutes since we
Okay,
wanted to
that's
talk
fine.
those.
That's fine with me because I think what the other thing that I was thinking in terms of like maybe main points we might want to cover tonight is that I think because people tend to keep trauma to themselves, and I respect why they do.
Mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
I really do. I get it because we have a culture that does blame victims, even things like
Right.
cancer. Why didn't you quit that job that was, where you were breathing in whatever bad thing that gave you lung cancer? Why didn't you, there's a lot of blaming, of people. This event happened to you. Probably you shouldn't have, whatever. You shouldn't have been there. You were in the right place at the wrong time. Shame on you. There's a lot of shaming and blaming, that goes on around
Mhm.
trauma. So I get it why people want to keep it to themselves. But I also know that because of that, most people probably don't think of the people around them as well. Those people have probably gone through trauma. But
Exactly.
the statement that I make is if you look around and you look at the people who actually seem the strongest to you
Mhm.
and seem resilient and they seem like they know what to do in crises and they can bounce back, it, those are not people who've never had a negative thing happen to them. They're
Right.
people, they're people who they've taken the trauma in their life and it's turned into growth after growth after growth after growth.
There is research that backs this up that I have read. In fact, it was 3 traumatic incidents in a person's life, which makes them superhuman. What this means is that it gives people superhuman characteristics. So
Yeah,
if you have that development of resiliency, the ability to get back up when you've been
yeah,
pushed down, I mean, this idea and being able to focus on your strengths,
yeah,
being able
yeah,
to zone in on those, bring those out, use those in
yeah,
your life, that's huge.
yeah,
And that's what people who have been through hardships, trauma, these problems, they become the mentors, they become the teachers, they become the people that the rest of us go like, oh, like this is an amazing person. It's
yeah,
because they've been through and they've let that strengthen them. And there's tons
yeah.
of examples.
Yeah, and we can talk about people like Maya Angelou, but we both know people,
Yeah.
and um, we thought it might make this a little more believable to people, like what you could do if we talked about some of, and these are all people that have given us permission
Hmm.
to, share not the identifying information, but their basic story. And I'm really looking forward to doing that because, I mean, first of all, it just honors them, and this is a group of people that I always say they deserve a couple of parades every year. They never get them because for the most part, what they do with their trauma is they work through it and they get the strength out of it that they can. And
Hmm.
the event becomes an event that happened, and the wisdom and the strength that they get from processing all of it. They generally don't walk around talking about it. So most people
Right.
don't know why they're so strong. I mean,
Right.
they look around and, I, you know, I just think it's impossible to be a person on this planet and not know somebody who's been through more than one traumatic event in their life. And the candidates in your life, you ought to look at is like, who looks super strong to you? Because the odds are part of their strength is that they, you know, bad stuff happened to them and
Been
they
through it.
figured out, yeah, they figured out how to turn that into something just well, this we were talking about this, the specifics of it, we should tell people, like, it's really common for people, their spiritual life to get bigger and better and stronger, which is part of why if you look at marginalized groups in most cultures, they often have very strong spiritual lives, partly because they
Hmm.
have to just survive some of the stuff that they're dealing with, right? People, a part of that narrative is people take a look at other people, and sometimes I hate to put it this way, but there's sort of a pruning,
Hmm.
right? There's sort of a pruning of the people in your life. You just sort of get more selective about who you're spending time with. And
Absolutely.
so as your friendships become better because you get it, like, I need high quality people around me, and people who are, more users or people who aren't very responsive to you. Not
Right.
that you're gonna vote them off the island. It just means that I just know where they're at and
Yeah.
they're not going to be there for me.
Yeah, after my experience, I didn't really have a a large use for superficial friendships after that. I really
Yeah,
wanted deeper connections, people
yeah,
that would.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's very understandable with someone who's gone through this, a life or death situation or has been through any traumatic situation. You come out of that and
hmm,
you are you're stronger in many ways. You're better, and you're looking for
yeah,
people who can meet you where you're at. So,
yeah. And I think for a lot of people, it is sad that they lose some people along the way,
yeah,
and and um and it's hard to be cavalier about it. It just often is something that has to happen because the other, as you said, there's a superficiality. They just don't get it yet, what
right.
you've been through. They just don't get it. It's not that uh it's not really that you're in a position, you're not really judging them. It's just the critique is accurate. That
Yeah,
what you want is you want something deeper and this person just can't or won't go deeper. And so okay. But it does mean sometimes leaving behind people you've loved, and that's hard. That's can be really hard. So that happens,
absolutely.
right? Relationships get deeper, and sometimes some are eliminated. It's really common for people to have a spiritual um improvement.
Awakening.
I don't know,
Yeah,
it's awakening, strengthening. And
yeah,
also importantly, people learn, like, wow, I would never have guessed I could survive that thing. Turns out I did. Turns out I got through it. And there is some pride in what I discovered about me. Yay me.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean,
I know that when
yeah.
things got hard, like when I was doing my master's thesis in graduate school, it got really hard and I had a lot of work. And I said to myself many times at that point, and in many other points that were hard, difficulties came up my life. I got through cancer. I did chemo. I can do this. I can go and do an MRI in a little tube, and I'm super claustrophobic. I can do that. I can totally kick this is butt.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, exactly.
it's very strengthening and very empowering.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so there's a I mean that narrative, I always say to people when I'm working with them on it, the narrative doesn't take away any of what you've already learned. It highlights things you probably haven't paid attention to. And
right.
that's part of why I'm iffy about journaling, in quotes, working completely,
Hmm.
because I just feel like another human being. That's why that dialogue, I think, is so important. Another
Right.
human being can see you and can see your strengths,
Absolutely.
in
And can be
ways that
that
you,
mirror. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that you can sometimes, you just can't see those things in yourself, and somebody else
Right.
can see it. somebody else can see it like, oh my God, it's like night and day to them. They can see it,
Yeah.
and you just can't yourself. So
Yeah.
that's,
And
I
I
think
think
that's a big part of it.
both components going together hand in hand are so crucial. That
Yeah,
intrapersonal world, being able to journal and work through things, and then bringing it and talking to other people about it,
yeah,
people who you
yeah,
trust, close people,
yeah,
safe people, and
yeah,
then having them mirror back what you're saying, or
yeah,
it can be very validating. It can be very
yeah.
strengthening. So
And sometimes the questions that are asked can deepen your understanding of you and what you're going through, and opens up doors,
exactly,
that you didn't think about.
new
So
doors to explore in your journal.
yeah,
So
yeah, exactly. Well,
yeah,
I think, I mean, I would love to, you've described your process, but it's not an atypical process. It's a really common one.
it is.
And I don't know, I just realized we've been talking to each other. I don't even know if there are anybody who's made comments or questions that we want to take up before we end here. But you're perfect. Is this accurate? I think if I understood it, you're perfectly willing to have people send you questions on your Facebook
Absolutely.
page, or
Please, please do.
they
We
can
would,
they can message you to keep it more private. Facebook Messenger, they can
yes.
send you a message,
Yeah.
and they
And
can ask questions. Right? Go ahead.
exactly. That's one thing that one thing that we want in the next call is if you have any questions or comments or anything to share about anything that we've talked about tonight, then, send it to me in an instant message and we will cover that in the next session. And our next on Wednesday, we're doing this again at the same time,
Yeah.
except for we will not be late on Wednesday because hopefully we will work out all of our technological
all
glitches.
the tech stuff. Yeah.
And so one big question that many people have at this point, we've talked about these 5 steps to getting there, and how, kind of the structure of how this works. And
Hmm.
it's worked in the lives of many people. It's worked for me. I've developed this process. We've helped people
Yeah.
along the way through this journey. But
Yeah.
that application piece, how they actually apply it to their lives, how this gets
Yeah.
applied, how you do
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah. And I think that is part of why when we talked about, how do you help people with that, there there's always the part about science is there, it's a 5-step thing, right? It's nice and linear. You write it all out, you get an A on the essay, yay.
mhm,
Um, and then there's real life where you're taking those and you're applying it, and that's much more artistic. It's a
right.
little less linear. Um, so I do think that the idea that you came up with is, well, we should talk about, you know, the not, we're not taking more credit than we deserve, but some of the people we've guided along this journey, and what they did, and the various the artistic application, let's put it that way. And we're fortunate that people have said, who know what we're up to here, like, yeah, no, bunch you, please tell my story. Of course, we will, as I said, we will for sure keep identities, all identifying information, none of that. But the journey, I think it will be really helpful for people to, if they have an idea now, having listened to us for a little while, like they really have an opportunity,
Mhm.
to get away from the stuckness, and to get away from things that have been, haunting might be a strong word, but it might not be a strong
No.
word. It might be the exact right word. Stuff that's lingering, that's, they can't get rid of it. It's in their head. It comes in, it goes out, but whatever. It's always sort of there. You know, the right kind of process, you can process that, and it leaves you alone. And
Mhm.
so how is that done? Well, we thought we would just demonstrate that a little bit through not stories about us so much, but stories about other people we've worked with. And the
Yeah.
particular our idea was, I thought this is a good idea of yours, like the particular journeys, and we can pull out the commonalities, but also you can see the uniquenesses, because human beings are, like, we all have something in common, human nature, but there is something unique about each of us too. So there is something
Yeah.
unique about the journey from trauma to post-traumatic growth, and we just thought, well, we could
Yeah.
share with people about. So I'm looking forward to that. As I
Yes.
said, I
Oh,
think
and
these.
as well, we want to hear from people. If you have something,
Yes,
send it to me
yes,
via an instant message. That if you have something that you, like what Julie was saying, that has been haunting you or bothering you, or it's just something that you can't quite let go of for whatever reason. It could be that example that she gave of
yeah,
that unprocessed meat. And we will address that, of course, with complete confidentiality, and no names
hmm
will be shared, no circumstances, but we will address that
yeah,
issue, that
yeah,
situation in our next call as well, if anybody has anything to ask about or
yeah,
share.
yeah. And let's take that a slight step farther, just to explain this to people too, Jenna. That
Mhm.
sometimes what happens in terms of protecting identity is that we just change something that's irrelevant. Like if it appears that somebody's age is irrelevant and the person says I'm, 27, I mean, we might change them into a 47-year-old when we're
Mhm.
telling the story because it might just be irrelevant, really. Their age, it might have no. So then that's a little way to protect identity. It's helpful to us to know the truth, but we might say, oh, this is somebody. I mean, maybe this person says I'm from Texas, and we say, well, this is somebody, they live south of the Mason-Dixon line. We don't have to say Texas. We can say, where it's warm right now. You and I both live in cold places right now. So,
Yes.
that's just so that people really know that it isn't just we're not going to tell your name. So, but we give people, this is standard, right? We have to learn how to do this when we're presenting at conferences and things like that, where identities need to be protected. People need to be protected. So it's not new to us how to do this. So we do that on Wednesday, and I really do hope that you hear from some people who've been watching, because I would
Me too.
love to be able to give them some direction. And you know it's limited because we'll be working with limited facts, but then we have the stories of people that we already know what they went through and their
Mhm.
process. We already know how it's turned out, and we'd love to have people. Well, the thing that you and I joke about is that anytime somebody feels sorry for us because we're like, oh my gosh, you have to sit around listening to people's problems, and we're like, we get to have like a front row seat in watching human beings like
Develop.
be amazed. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like for us, it's like watching the Olympics all day long. Yeah,
exactly.
don't feel sorry for me. it's
No.
it's a it's an honor, right, to do this
Yeah.
kind of work. So
It's what I and I'm sure you feel the same way, but it's what I'm 100% passionate about,
yeah,
helping people through. Yeah, so it is an honor. I like that
yes,
example. It's like the Olympics. That's perfect. I never thought about it, but it is.
yeah, yeah,
Humans are amazing, and watching the different
yeah,
journeys, it is like the Olympics, where you're just like in awe of everyone that
yeah,
goes across the screen and
yeah.
over.
Anybody's even in the game, right? Because
Yeah,
even if they come in last, who cares? They're in the game. They're in the
right.
game. They're trying hard, and they deserve a parade. So we get to
Yep.
see the Olympics every day that we work.
Yes.
It's
Yes, we
nice.
do. Amen to
So
that.
we are happy to keep talking, and we're gonna collectively put our heads together for anybody who writes something in, give some
Yes.
ideas about
And
directions they maybe could take, and and also, we can tell about the particulars of other people's journeys. Go ahead.
right. Well, and for anybody who's here that you don't have anything to share, make sure you come back on Wednesday, because we will be talking about how to apply these things that we've talked about tonight to
Yeah,
your journey. So, I mean, I know a lot of people that I have worked with, and they say, I don't really feel like I have a lot of trauma in my life. And then I hear some of the things they've been through, and I'm like, ooh, it sounds like trauma. But they were maybe able already to process a lot of that. It's not,
yeah, yeah,
people can do that. It is a natural thing to process and grow on your own, but there are certain things, and maybe you just need to hear how to apply this to help with little things. It's not always like a huge big, like, I was molested, or I was X, Y, and Z, something terrible. It's not always like that. Sometimes it's just for the little, being
hmm
able to make it through the day. So, I mean,
yeah. And I
little
think
T and big T, big T, sorry.
one of the clues that you probably have a little bit of trauma to process is cynicism.
Hmm.
You know, that's, you know, we don't think of cynicism as like it's a symptom, but what happens when people actually process trauma is they get really full. They get hopeful, they get
Hmm.
enthused about the future, they get about as non-cynical as you can get. And so that's a little clue that like you might have a little something lingering there. So if you're a little skeptical about life, if you're a little held in close to yourself, if you don't reveal a lot of things, if you're not um, you know, if you're shy, you know, about connecting with people, that might be a trauma reaction more than most people think. Triggers like getting, you know, sparked right away. Like something happens that, like, you know, you look at road rage and, you know, that might be related to some trauma. You don't know.
Yeah.
There are lots of things that if it's not processed, it really haunts you and drags you down. So we're trying to, we'll see what we could do here in a week, but we thought we could do something in a week to
Yes.
help people. So high five to both of us that we're trying to do our parts. There we go.
High five.
All right. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. Again,
Thank you,
Dr.
Jenna.
Julie Helmrich, and I am so grateful that she was able to join me in talking with you tonight. And we will be back on Wednesday, so do
It'll
not
be
miss it.
great.
Do not miss it.
Thanks for inviting me, Jen. I'm happy to be
Thank
here.
you for being here.
All right. Bye-bye.